the intro music. Yeah! Woohoo!
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be taking a look at the first episode of Strange New Worlds, the latest in Star Trek's we got 5 different Star Trek series out right now, and it's a fantastic time to be a Star Trek fan. You know what I mean? No matter where you kind of fall on the various Star Trek spectrums, there is a type of a show for everybody. You know, you've got Prodigy, which is kind of designed towards kids, you know, preteens, teenagers, and even young adults. You got Lower Decks for millennials, Gen Zs. You've got Discovery, which really helped bring all this forth, love it or hate it. And we'll talk about Discovery a little bit tonight because it actually ties into episode 1. You've got Star Trek Picard, and then now you've got Strange New Worlds. So we're going to talk about all those. Now, real quick, got to say this, and it's kind of obvious, but spoiler alert, everybody. Just a huge fat, comment down below. Let me look. Yeah, there's spoilers down there. So be warned. Spoilers. If you have not watched this episode, I will be talking in depth about this episode. So don't watch if you haven't seen it yet, or if you're not okay hearing what's going to happen in the show. Now, I will say one of the reasons that you might like Strange New Worlds is it returns to the episodic format that Star Trek was known for in the 70s, 60s, 80s, 90s, etc. Now, a lot of shows have left that format, and that's not just Star Trek, that's just media in general. Not everybody runs that style anymore, but this show does. And now with you having that style, I think a lot of older fans who maybe didn't enjoy some of the newer styles of Trek get a little bit of taste for them. At the same time, this show is 100% not a just rehash of old storylines. And we'll talk about a fresh storyline and a fresh take here. But let's go ahead and start. You start off the episode with this great splash screen. Now, this splash screen is the new of Star Trek. And even from the very beginning, you can feel that we've got a great mix, in my opinion, of new and old, I guess you could say. You start off with this new intro where we see an alien race. And by the way, for obvious reasons, I can't play video on the screen. If I did, videos get taken down. CBS doesn't like this. We're showing screenshots. So we get an alien race. It's just generic Star Trek. Everybody's humanoid. Everybody's kind of, we all look the same, but slight facial differences, which I don't know if it's just because we're in technology now. We can make people be 8-foot tall octopus monsters, but I think it's kind of a nod to what Star Trek's been for a long time, and even to an extent, Star Wars. So we see the first glimpse of the ship, the USS Archer, which is NCC 627. I've got some problems with the Archer, which is what you see on your screen, but we'll talk about that later. And you see the instrumentation panel for the alien race. Appreciate that they went into the detail to actually put some of this new language lettering here. But we're going to keep moving through as this kind of gives us an intro. We hear number 1 in the background. I'm really excited about her being in the show and getting to really kind of dive into her character. Obviously, Miss Roddenberry was the original number 1 back in the pilot. So as we get through the intro, which, by the way, the intro was absolutely stunning. It is a great mix of the 70s and the 2020s and the themes, and they're mixing together. You see styles of how Discovery's intro is, but the music and some of the styles are definitely how the original series is. You've got, we'll cover it. We'll keep Cutaway gets into this part right here where Anson Mount, who plays Pike and also Black Bolt in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is having breakfast with his girlfriend, who is also a Star Trek captain, makes pancakes. So what's wrong with pancakes? Who doesn't love pancakes? And he's got a nice scruffy beard out. He's in snowy Montana, very clearly not wanting to participate in what's going on with Starfleet. And I'll explain why in just a little bit. He's got severe mental health issues, and you can kind of get that as you get to the first beginnings of the episode before the cinematic intro starts rolling. So because of this, the Admiral, who's trying to get a hold of Pike on his communicator, and of course Pike's ignoring him, goes out riding on his horse through the snow. Where were you going, sir? The Admiral himself comes to visit Pike and say, yo, we got to get you back on the Enterprise. And Pike's like, you don't want me on the Enterprise. I'm not ready. And he's like, yo, you don't want you on the Enterprise. You've got this all confused. So he orders him onto the ship, and they go and get everything ready because they've got to go rescue number 1, who is lost doing that first contact mission, which is what we saw in the first picture. USS Archer was led by number 1 to go do a first contact mission with a new society that they had detected a warp presence at. So Now we've got to find out, oh gosh, what happened? Where are they? We've got to rescue them. So then we get into the intro. I've got a screenshot of it here. Beautiful cinematic. Like I said, we get to see the new styling of the Enterprise, which has that new feel, but once again, giving a lot of love to the original styling of the original series, though obviously updating it for 2022 because people want to see the updated look. So it's kind of what we have here. I do really want to harp on that. So much of this is a beautiful storytelling feel similar to the original Star Trek, where Anson Mount is talking about the Enterprise's 5-year mission, just as William Shatner did as James T. Kirk in the original series. You have a lot of lineups here that work so well while also bringing in a lot of the new stuff that we've been having. And just an intro alone, I thought was so beautifully done. So after that, we get into this part, which is going to be an interesting storyline and gives probably your first direct tie-in to the original series. So the two characters you see on the screen are Ethan Peck's Spock and then T'Pring right here. Now, many of you are going, well, this seems like they're getting married. They're becoming betrothed, and this is actually where T'Pring asked Spock to marry her, and you would be right. But what you're probably confused about is both in Star Trek Fleet Command, the game, and also Star Trek, the original series, Stan is actually the mate of T'Pring. So what we have in the original series, and was it Amok Time, you've got Kirk who has to fight against Spock to a battle to the death. And that is because, well, T'Pring has chosen another lover. And you can kind of get an idea of why in these scenes that are going to lead up to here, where basically T'Pring wants Spock to settle back on Vulcan and be her man. And Spock wants to gallivant around the universe. Direct quote from T'Pring. But this is the start. You see that flame of the romance there, and even a picture that I was tempted to put onto YouTube. It's a little spicy, little caliente, but we see Spock and not yet. We see that's the Kelvin time. We see Spock and T'Pring kind of having a little stuff time before Kirk calls him back to the Enterprise. Next scene we go into is Kirk on a shuttlecraft heading to the Enterprise. He's clean shaven, and I chose this screenshot because it's talking about one of the new characters that's joining the Enterprise, which is Leon Noonien Singh. And yes, that name should ring a bell. I chose this so you could actually read through the details. And this is telling of the first contact of the Gorn, which is actually how Leon Noonien Singh was found, the only survivor of the SS Puget Sound. So very, very interesting there. Now, one curious thing for future reference is he reads the file, knows her story, but she never tells him. And it's kind of like this little bit of contention throughout the show. But moving on to the next one, Pike takes command, he warps him out, but this entire time he's seeing visions of the future that he sees. And for those who have not seen it, in Star Trek Discovery Season 2, Pike is a key character. Pike, Spock, Number One, all make appearances, and that's actually what happened in terms of getting Strange New Worlds on the air. So even if you hate Discovery, you should watch Discovery Season 2 to see Pike's story. In the short run, Pike sees his future. You know, the future of we see in Pike in the original series, which sadly, some horrible episodes where they talk about Pike and his wheelchair thing. But anyway, he sees that, and this is 10 years before. So 10 years before, he sees what's going to happen. He gets that vision, and it's really messing with his head. Understandably so. It would definitely mess with my head. And then you have this aspect where they're discussing Burnham, and which is Spock's sister, and they're talking about how much they miss him. You even have a mention of James T. Kirk's brother, who you'll see cameoed here at the end and who will be a crew member for the show. And it's just really messing with Pike, and I completely understand it. You know, also, I forgot to mention this. Uhura's here, and they call her the Prodigy, and she hasn't really had a storyline built for her yet. It's only episode 1, but that's why I kind of left her out of my notes, but that's exciting. So Pike is seeing these reflections, it's distracting him, and in his quarters, he's talking with Spock, trying to come to terms with how this will affect him, knowing his death, knowing his end, and what it means to him. And Spock's like, look, it can be a powerful tool for you to see your death and then work inside the confines of that. So I think it's a fantastic way to build what will be the climax of this episode. Moving on to the next one, we finally get the Enterprise arriving at the planet where the USS Archer was. Now, here's my one major issue with this episode. One fantastically major. Oh, it ground my gears. That's the USS Archer. You see it in the background. A regular starship. Apparently, Number One and 2 astrophysicists were the only ones on it. That's it. 3 people crewing that bloody starship, and they all beam down to the planet. That is the biggest issue I have with this entire thing. Absolutely. I don't know if the writers thought that they couldn't send the Enterprise unless it was abandoned. I really don't know. I guess that was their way of getting the Enterprise there, but I think the Enterprise would have come anyway with number 1 missing. But anyway, that's the biggest issue I have with this episode. That's really it. I kind of like everything else, but that was a big issue. Like, that it made no freaking sense at all. Anyway, here we go. Gosh, that was so weird. So then we get into this discussion between Spock and number 1. Should we raise the shields? Pike gets convinced to raise the shields from Khan, or we call it Lael, where now we have the planet firing weapons at the Enterprise. We now know they're not friendly. So that means we pretty much assume number 1 and company are being held captive. We have to go rescue them, which is where we get to actually see Dr. Mbenga and Nurse Chapel for the first time, who helps produce this. Nurse Chapel does some genome editing on Spock, Captain Pike, and the feisty new number 1, who will be the chief tactical officer, and changes their appearance to better match them moving down to the surface, which I think is fantastic. It's a play on all Star Trek. It's something very common they would do across Star Trek, even with Phlox doing basic stuff in Star Trek Enterprise. And then as it gets more advanced, you see what they do in Deep Space Nine and The Next Generation, which is complete change, as you can see with this example right here. So I think it's a great little play. It gives us a great introduction to Mbenga and Nurse Chapel, and it was really well done to me as they arrive here. Then you get like a basic little fight scene thrown in with the new chief tactical officer, and you can tell that they're trying to throw in some basic character development for these characters. They want you to show that they're not just going, they're really trying to build stories for them and not just have them do things. So it's great because when you have this action scene, she then explains the tactics that she used and why she used them, giving into her story, and it makes you want to learn more about her. And I really, really appreciated that. Then we get into the scene. Like I said, obviously there's going to be a problem. And of course, it's got to be with Spock. The genome starts wearing off and he starts showing his regular features, and it becomes a problem for the crews. They're trying to rescue number 1. And as you can kind of surmise, it's going to be coming to a problem, and fist fights will be had, and pew-pews will be done before they can actually get to the rescue. Some of it's kind of predictable storyline, but that's okay. That doesn't make it bad. And here you can see at the rescue point, and we determine, hey, we figured out what caused this. Number 1 says it's actually back when Discovery was thrown into the future. This planet was less than 1 light year away, meaning the scenes of what's going on could have been seen by the planet's telescopes. And then apparently they were able to reverse engineer a matter-antimatter process by simply viewing it through a telescope. Now, if anybody in this view right now, if anybody here is an astrophysicist of some type, can you explain to me how viewing something through a telescope a light year away, but that's obviously just has to deal with the amount of time it takes to get to you, could you be able to reverse engineer that level of technological advancement by just simply seeing what's going on? I would love to know down in the comments. I seriously would. I'm fascinated by this type of stuff. And if that is any type of feasible, please, Lord, let it happen to us. Now, as you can have surmised by now, this planet turned it into a weapon, not a warp drive. So for the first time ever, they're finding warp weapon. So basically an antimatter-matter reaction as a weapon. So Spock talks about how it's the first civilization that ever does this, yada, yada. And now they're like, oh, darn, it's us. Discovery ruined everything. So, hey, chat, as you've always believed, Discovery ruined everything. And there you go, very proof. Discovery ruined it. So, oh gosh, I'm gonna catch flack for that one in our Discord. It's such a divide on Discovery. But I really did like season 2. Mostly I like season 2 because of Pike. And then season 3 and season 4 were good. For season 1, I still can't stand. I will say, for Discovery, Pike was my favorite captain in Discovery. I'll say that. So anyway, we go throughout this whole thing. What should we do? Who should we go to? Who should we trust? Obviously, number 1's like, yeah, it's our fault. Pike's like, we'll deal with it. Moving on to the next. We get into this where Pike has beamed everybody else back to the Enterprise except himself and Spock. And they're into this debate. They've made themselves known to the leader of the civilization that created the weapon version of the matter-antimatter. And it comes down to, we got a bigger stick. We're going to win. And Pike's like, au contraire, madame. I've got the bigger stick. Look at it. And it actually is pretty freaking badass when he calls for the Enterprise to go into low orbit and reveal themselves. Imagine being a civilization that does not have space travel and the technological ability to do this, and just having a massive freaking spaceship just kind of low orbit be like, yo, what's up, boss? Scare the crap out of me too. So as you can predict, they start listening. They're not listening quite as well as you would like, though. So what ends up happening is Pike comes down again, and he uses this as an opportunity to explain, look, here's what was happening with Earth in the early 21st century with eugenics wars, which are directly mentioned, World War III, the Second United States Civil War. All this gets discussed with footage being played of protests around the world that we've seen in our own lives. And this is a great example of Star Trek using current events to push an idea of unity and working together for a greater good, and which is a great theme and a pretty universal theme from the original series that you even see in The Next Generation. And even though it touches on some topics that probably be pretty sensitive to today's time, honestly, that's what Star Trek's always been. It's been progressive in how it takes ideas to try to push us to the future. And it talks about if these people are unable to take these type of weapons and these type of technologies and use it for good instead of evil, what they'll do is destroy themselves. And they talk about how 600,000 life forms, insects, animals, etc. died, plants on Earth due to these wars, and how it caused great devastation and it took so long to recover from, using it as a warning for why this civilization must work to unify themselves and then join something for the greater good, and in this case, the United Federation of Planets. I'll admit, I got choked up during the entire monologue, and I don't care. I'm not ashamed. I really loved it. It was fantastic Star Trek, and I'll go as far to say this. If you've made it through 16 minutes, this was a fantastic sci-fi show, let alone a fantastic Star Trek for episode 1. One of the better episode 1s we've ever had. Finally, we get to the debriefing session with the Admiral. I cut it off, but there's a beautiful shot of the Enterprise here in the background. Actually, I'll move it over just a little bit. You see the Enterprise. There's a beautiful shot of the Enterprise in the background, and they're just basically going through a debrief. There's a funny little joke here as we're winding down the episode where Admiral's like, yeah, we're going to move from calling it General Order 1 to the Prime Directive, and Pike's like, well, that'll never stick. Yeah, so funny little moments to be had there. And then we get here towards the end. Like I said, we're lowering the mood. We're getting into more kind of a fun atmosphere. We've got Samuel Kirk here. That is the brother. Now, first thing some of you are going to be like, oh my God, they're adding another family member to a well-known cast member. Because that was a big gripe about Burnham. What do you mean Spock's got a sister? Well, James T. Kirk's brother Samuel is actually referenced and played by William Shatner in the original series. So Samuel Kirk was already a character, was already a real person who is now going to serve under Spock on the Enterprise. And if you actually go through his history in the original series, it's really not that off base, so it kind of makes sense. And I'm curious to see how this character develops, to see more of the Kirk family, and do they actually point towards James T. Kirk in this? I'm really, really curious to see. But overall, that is basically everything to do with Star Trek Strange New Worlds. As an episode by itself, if this was the only Star Trek episode and we rated it by its own storyline, a 9 out of 10 for me. There's really not a ton of nitpick. There's little things here and there, like, oh, Ethan Peck isn't Leonard Nimoy. You've got to get past that because Leonard Nimoy sadly is passed. You know, when Quinto had the ability to play Spock in the Kelvin movies, well, he had Leonard Nimoy to learn from. Ethan Peck does not, and you just got to get used to a new style of Spock, which can be very difficult for a lot of fans. But overall, there was great fan service, but fantastic story, and I really enjoyed it. I'm curious to know what you thought as well. And this video is going on way too long, but that's the case with Star Trek. It's so good that this video, reviewing it, is a third of the length of the show itself. Let me know what you thought of the show in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of this. It's my first time doing this type of thing, talking Star Trek from a review perspective. Let me know how I can get better and how I can be better. I appreciate everybody who's watched it. Sorry for taking up so much of your time, but I strongly encourage you, if you're one of those people who just couldn't quite get into some of the Trek before, if you don't like this Trek, then honestly, you probably have never liked any Star Trek to begin with. This has got a little bit for everybody, and I absolutely loved it. Hopefully, you did too. Live long and prosper. Stay safe for those Space Cowboys. Deuces, that's me. I'll catch you on the next one. We outie, because that's me, and I'm done.
An even better outro than the intro. For the Empire and glory to your house.